This episode is brought to you by Hub24, whose purpose is to connect advisors to innovative solutions that create opportunity. They're massive supporters of advisors, in particular those going solo, and they're one of the early players in the managed account space, and their epic functionality in that area, as well as their commitment to user experience, has led them to become a market leader in terms of advisor satisfaction. I can speak from personal experience when I say their BDM team are total legends, and they're there to help you work through the best solutions for your business. So you can check out more information at hub24.com.au. This episode is also brought to you by Centuria, who are a boutique, ultra high-performing fund manager. They've won pretty much all the awards there are to win. They've got a bunch of 5-star rated funds, and they're heavy into technical support for advisors around their products and strategies. On top of that, they're just an awesome group of people, and they've got a dedicated team there to support you. And if you haven't already spoken to the guys at Centuria and heard about what they do yourself a favor and reach out.
We're here today with Daniel Murray from Empathic Consulting. So, Daniel, you've come to us through a bit of a network of friends, you might say. You've been involved with some cool stuff that's put you in touch with Ray Jaramis, and he thought it'd be awesome for everyone to hear what you're up to and what you've been doing.
Yeah. I've got a bit of a different background to some people. So I've come into contact with Ray. I'm fascinated by advice and financial advice in particular, and the whole world of how do we help people create better futures for themselves and for each other. So it was a good conversation with Ray, and he thought it'd be good to get in touch and jump on the podcast. Yeah,
well, the stuff that Ray's doing is really interesting. Like he's essentially studying psychology and really doing his best. He's in the academia world with some of the researchers there, trying to link some of the psychology stuff that's going on with financial advice and client engagement. So there's lots of frontiers there and interesting things. And you've been doing some of that stuff in the corporate or the commercial sphere for a while now.
Yeah, so I guess my journey, quite strangely, my undergrad was in pure and applied mathematics, which is incredibly dull. And I spent most of my career in banking, finance, working for big companies like QBE, CBA. And my role there was largely as a problem solver. So I worked in internal management consulting. I would get given very big problems, and my job was to fix them. So as an example, I was sent to New Zealand. CommBank owned a bank over there called ASB, and my job was to help them find $130 million of cost savings. That was the brief. And
where do you find those?
Where do you find it? Yes, right. Well, interestingly enough, what we did was empowered the business to find them.
You thought, we can't find the savings, we'll just increase the growth, or is that?
No, that was one of the things. Look, and psychology played a really big role there, and in all projects that we do. And what I found was, technical solutions are interesting, but unless you consider the human element of them, they often fail really poorly. So it was really about understanding the people, what was going on in their heads. With the maths background, you can design really amazing equations. So you can write an equation which will put a rocket ship on the moon. And that equation, you can write it on a piece of paper and it'll work almost every time, right?
Yeah.
You can write equations to find out where electrons are around an atom. They're incredibly complex, but they're equations and they work. You send a guy to the shops and ask him to get salad dressing, there is no equation you can write which is going to describe what he comes back with, right?
No. Is it French? Is it Italian?
Someone walks into a shoe store to buy a pair of shoes, and it's a bit of a mystery as to what they're going to come out with.
Yeah, the human element is always the X factor, you might say.
Well, absolutely, and you can't write clear equations because we're too complicated. And that complexity is something that fascinated me. understanding it, trying to deal with it more, particularly things like emotions. So I've spent quite a bit of time in researching things like neuroscience and psychology and behavioral economics and reading and digesting and speaking to people. And my job is, how do I take my understanding of those areas and translate them into simple tools and models and frameworks that business people could pick up and start to use and practice and get better at.
Yeah, nice. So is it, I guess what's been the thing that jumps out most of the time when you dropped into a business, and is there anything in particular that comes to the fore?
Yeah, I think that one thing that never sort of goes away, or you see really regularly and yet is completely false, is that we have this underlying belief that we're rational. You know, the economics has this theory of the rational investor who always maximises their utility. When it comes to humans, that is complete rubbish. Like, it's just not at all true. And the example I always use for this is, if humans were rational, how many types of car would there be on the road?
Well, it'd just be one, and it'd be the cheapest colour.
Yeah, and like there might be a couple of sizes, like maybe small, medium, large, but there would be very, very few.
Yeah, it'd be the small car, the medium, and the family size.
And funnily enough, when you read back about it, that was Henry Ford's vision, right? He fought with his own family and his company because they wanted to make new, different types of car. And he said, we don't need more. We've got it. We've got one and it works. Right? Stop asking questions.
Yeah.
And what never ceases to amaze me is that while we know that we don't buy cars because of what they are, we buy cars because of how they make us feel. We know this, right? It's obvious when you think about it. While we know that we're not rational, we just continue to build systems and processes and whole organisations and structures around this misinterpretation of humans.
Completely ignoring the human element.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And whether it's in advice and banking or construction, if we got a computer to design a building, all the buildings in Sydney would be identical and they'd be really efficient and really effective, low energy use. You could do that tomorrow. No one would want to live there. No one would want to work there because it wouldn't inspire us.
There's no character that comes into play.
And it doesn't deal with the most important things of humans, which is emotions. And so emotions are what drive us. Your phone doesn't have emotions. Your phone actually doesn't even have problems.
I think Siri gets upset sometimes, depending on what you ask her.
She's been told to respond in certain ways based on algorithms.
But she's not feeling it.
She's not feeling it. You don't... the example I always think about here is what would happen if I asked a computer to draw a dragon? Well, a simple computer program would go and find 1 million pictures of dragons and then show you all of these pictures of dragons, right?
Yeah.
And then found them and you're done. You've solved your problem. If you ask a little kid to do it, what do?
Probably just think of the last dragon they saw and just draw it.
And they imagine it, right?
Yeah, well, they imagine it, yeah.
Right? They can draw things that have never existed before. And that's miraculous. That's incredible. Humans, the genius of humans is that we can feel things and believe in things that aren't real, that don't exist. And this area of psychology and the way the brain works, when you look at neuroscience, the belief we have about how our brains work and how they actually work are really distant. And we build a lot of businesses, we build a lot of infrastructure for these mythical, rational humans that don't exist.
Would you say there's, I guess what you come up against is a rigidity of thought that gets applied to things, and is your role when you come in to add a bit of flex into things so it adapts to like these emotions and is that?
Look, I'm not sure if it's the rigidity's inbuilt, right? So you've got to remember your brain it's been designed or developed or evolved over a really, really long period of time, right? So your brain's been on a journey for millions of years to get to where it is now, and it's incredibly complex and beautiful, and it's about 85 billion neurons connected through trillions of little pathways, and how electrical currents fire through those pathways is what makes up everything that you know, right?
Does that equate to Watson yet? Or
I don't think Watson is anywhere near that complicated.
Okay.
Right? It's just we can't.
So we've still got one up on AI at the moment.
Sort of.
So
The challenge though with our brains is it was designed. So for most of those, let's say 3 million years, most of those 3 million years, your brain was evolved to live in a certain environment. And specifically, the most complicated thing we ever have to deal with is other human beings, right? We're way more complicated than the rest of the environment. So our brain has been designed to live in environments of about 100 to 200 people who are just like us.
yeah,
Right.
okay.
200 years ago, you lived in a village in Finland, for example. Mongolian people didn't exist. They were irrelevant. Actually, for most people in those small villages, Italians didn't exist.
Yeah.
They just never came.
Genghis Khan had not made it yet.
Well, the challenge is even if those events happened, they were rare,
Yeah.
short windows of time.
Alexander the Great.
Yeah, and
that
they would
sort of
come,
thing.
but then they would go. And the majority of a life, or the way our brain was hardwired, the majority of the people we interacted with were pretty much like us. And so we sort of created this base understanding of how people are, that they're all pretty much like us, right? Now, that hardware hasn't changed in the last 50, 100 years, but gee, the environment has, right? Now we walk down the street and we'll interact with thousands of people who are nothing like us, who think totally differently, who look totally differently. And so while the rigidity is apparent now because of these differences in us, it shouldn't be surprising because the hardware we're dealing with hasn't upgraded, right? Hasn't changed. And what I call mental models that we build, these are I sort of think of them as ways in which we understand how the world is. And I describe this as a huge filing cabinet in your head with thousands of little cue cards, right? And so as a baby, it's empty. And then you start to interact with the world and you start to fill out these cue cards. You know, a chair.
Or your little experiences.
Yeah, exactly right. Experiences. So, touching something that's hot, that hurts, and I don't do that. And, eating food's good and tastes nice. And, I get these feedback and response, and certain foods I like and some I don't. All these different relationships, interactions happen, and we store them in these little cards. And these are really important. So when you walk into a room and you see the chairs, you know they're chairs straight away, right? It's instant. Chairs.
It's assumed.
Yeah. And if there's chairs and there's tables and it's on an outside area, it's probably a restaurant or a cafe. Now, there's nothing that says this is a restaurant or cafe, but you know it instantly because it matches to a model you've built in your head that says restaurants and cafes are often outside on with tables and chairs, right? So these shortcuts are really important. We build them so that we can navigate through the world quickly and efficiently and effectively. The problem is we use them for other people. And when we find people who we don't know very well or aren't like us, the amount of information we have on that little card for them is fairly limited. Right? So it's natural that we'll go, mum and dad are complex and, have many layers because I know lots about them. And me, myself, I'm a complicated person and I'm very interesting and complicated and I've got all these things. North Korean people, the amount of information you've got on that card are really small. And
what's the show, the cartoon with the Americans?
American Dad, or So when we don't have a very detailed mental model, we have an assumption. The trick we've got is that the way we navigate through the world naturally, we believe that our mental models are objective truths. Right, so
and you're projecting that.
You use that as your basis for everything that you do and think, and the story you tell yourself. So, a lot of what I'm trying to do with businesses is not necessarily change them or change the systems. What I'm trying to do is let the people and the leaders in the business be aware of what's going on inside their own heads, and what we're trying to do is help push them towards being more curious leaders who look at those areas that they don't understand, and instead of going, well, I don't know and so I'm going to ignore it, go, that's interesting. Wonder what else could be going on there.
So retraining, I guess, the immediate behaviour that people react with things they don't know, is that sort of...
Yeah, that's right. And the most important one is, how do I react with other people, my customers, or my employees, my peers, my boss? So I'll give you an example. I was speaking at a conference for a client 2 weeks ago. And we do an exercise, and in this exercise, they have to, in pairs, share a conversation. And then I asked everyone to put their hand up and, share their story. And as is often the case, immediately no one puts their hand up. Right? No one wants to go first. Cool. And then after a few seconds, as a facilitator, I've always learnt that silence is more uncomfortable for them than it is for me. Mm-hmm. So just let everyone hang there, and then someone will put their hand up.
Should I say something?
Someone will say something, right? So I waited, and a guy put his hand up and he said, "Oh, Garth's got a great story." Pointed to the guy next to him, right? And I won't go into that story, but let's just take that particular incident that occurred.
Stopped him in.
Okay, cool. So what's happening here is you've got a model as to, the guy's name was Alan. Why Alan did what he did? Why do you think he did it?
Well, he didn't have a good idea, but he knew Bob had a good idea, so he thought, share Bob's idea.
Sure. Okay. So he might have thought that's one possible scenario. Now,
or he just wanted to give shit to Bob, so he's like,
right. So that could be true as well. He might have looked at me and felt, this guy's feeling really uncomfortable because no one's saying anything. I feel really bad about that. I want to break the silence, and I know Bob's got a good story, so I'll dob in Bob. So there's a whole bunch of possible reasons why he might have been. Maybe he's an asshole, right? Maybe Alan's just not a very good guy, and he doesn't like Bob, and he knows Bob's going to feel uncomfortable if he dobs him in. He's going to do it anyway because that's just how he is. Now, what's interesting is, at the moment, we don't know if any of those stories are real, but what you'll generally do is you'll choose one straight away.
You'll pick your favourite story.
The instinctive one.
Yeah.
The story that fits the model of the person. That could be based on what he looks like, could be based on how you feel at that point in time, a whole bunch of situational information. But you choose one and you choose it instantly. And then you proceed based on that basis.
And you react to everything like that.
So if I believe that he's a great guy who's helping me out, I'll be kind to him and nice to him, more likely to be. Mm-hmm. If I believe he's being an ass, then I'll treat him in that regard. Right? And so straight away at that point in the conference, we're going to have a junction where there's two really different paths that we could go down, which could influence everything else that's going to happen. And
everyone in the course is making a call.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
And yet that decision is not based on anything factual. It's based on that mental model I choose.
It's the shortcuts.
That's right. Yeah. And so what we're trying to do is say to leaders, be aware that that's going to happen. It happens all the time. You do it all the time. Right? Irrespective of whether you're conscious of it or not, you do it all the time. Be aware of it. Mm-hmm. When you find incidents where the result of that reaction could be important, as in that situation, then you need to be consciously able to pause and be curious and go, okay, well, hang on, what else could be true here?
Reframe it. Yeah.
What else might be going on? And look at possibilities. And then how do I determine which one's going to be right? Well, I'll need more information. And so you might not pass judgment on Alan straight away. But you might go, oh, that's interesting, Alan. Why did you think Bob's story is a good story? You can start to explore that and break that down. And so in each of these tiny little situations that we go through in life, we don't realise it, but we run on automatic all the time using these existing models. Mm-hmm. And we do it because we believe they are objective truths about the world. Right? We believe that they are how they are. People are how they are. Things are how they are.
What about if is it just easier for some people to operate like that?
It's absolutely easy. No, we don't do it because we're bad people.
Yeah.
This is important, right? You're not doing it that way because you're not a good person or you're dumb or insensitive. You're doing it because your brain is designed not for brilliance. Your brain is designed for survival. Mm-hmm. And having that thought process of being curious slows you right down. Mm-hmm. Now, in a survival situation, that is not what you want to do. You don't want to slow right down, right? You want to react. Your body's designed to stay alive. Your brain is designed to help you do that. So your natural reaction is do it quickly, make a decision, and then move forward. Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe there was a in our ancestry, maybe there was a branch of humans that branched off and they didn't have that sort of natural hardwired mental model survival instinct. They were just always curious.
Yeah.
They didn't make it, right? Because when the lions started coming around and they're like, oh, these things look interesting, wonder maybe they're not angry today. They were just swept out of the
They would have been fine if they were born in the Renaissance.
That's right.
At that point in time.
Well, and even that, right? So through history, you can look at history really easily, really quickly, and see a huge number of people who were curious and challenged norms, and what happened to them. You know, Galileo was put.
Wasn't received too well.
Wasn't received well at all, because your brain's designed to remove uncertainty from the world. Right? That's what it's designed to do. Questioning things does not reduce uncertainty; it adds uncertainty. Right? And that's what I'm challenging you to do. Open your possibilities up. You're not designed to do it.
I'm curious, have you seen correlations between whether it's certain roles, backgrounds, characteristics of people and their ability to sort of not get caught up in, is it an experience thing? Is it someone that's come from a certain background or someone that has certain life experiences that generally dictates that, or what?
Yeah, look, it's I liken it to being athletic, right? So, because people often say, so I would call this area as the skill of empathy. People often say, well, empathy, you're either born with it or you're not. It's natural. It's not teachable, right? It's just this innate thing. And I sort of go, yeah, I don't agree. I think that's rubbish, because there are people who are naturally born better at running than others. But if they don't use it in practice, then, you know, sitting on the couch, you're not going to be very good at running. There are people who aren't born very talented runners who do ultra marathons and are fantastic at it. I think empathy is much the same, right? You might have a predisposition to a certain style, but it's something you can learn, you can practice, and if you don't practice it, you will lose it. You question, are there people who are more predisposed to being good at this stuff? Yes, but I would say it's less natural and more because they practice behaviours that help them do it.
Yeah. Would it be life activity in their life that tipped them into discovering more about that, or force them to?
Yeah, look, I think sometimes. I mean, often I find people who travel a lot, they will. Not always, but there's a good correlation, I think, between travelling and being more curious, because you're immediately challenged with all of your mental models, right? Because they don't hold anymore. Yeah.
Well, the question on that one is, but are the people that go travelling, are they already in that bucket? They're predisposed to it.
Potentially,
they compound it because they're training it more.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, do people travel to see? You know, some people go to Thailand so they can go to a resort and lay by the pool. I think that's madness. You can do that here. Why go all the way over there when you can go and explore a new culture? So there's there are different motivations and reasons why people travel and ways in which they do it.
We've got, like at XY Advisor, we've got a strong affinity with South America, and we had a session with Emily, who is our community manager, and pretty much just talking about that's why she got hired, because she'd travelled to South America, and like just that attitude was in sync with how we operate.
Yeah, and look, I think I personally love travelling. I love exploring, and I find it a really great way to practice, you know, that level of understanding. But look, here's an example or an exercise in ways that you can get unstuck if you don't do it. Even if you travel regularly, let's just say you're getting on a train. Now, here in Sydney, you get on a train, not really, you don't line up, but you sort of get on after the person who's in front of you, right? Now, let's say you're there on the station, you're getting on, and you notice a person who looks like they might be from India, for example, and they'll walk up to the side of the train, they'll scoot along the edge of the train, and they'll just sort of push on in front of someone. To sort of cut the line a little bit.
They've had a different background of getting on trains.
Yeah, that's
right. More competitive.
That's right. Now, it's easy for you if you haven't seen or witnessed this before.
It's a horrible person. He's cutting in.
Yeah, how dare he? He's rude, right? And in your little mental model, you don't know much about people from India, right? So you have this little mental model, it's pretty blank, and you'll put that in there. Oh, that's strange. Rude at getting on trains. And you might see that happen a couple of times, and that'll reinforce your belief. And you might even turn that belief into, I think Indian people might be just rude.
Yeah.
Right? And now, it's not to say you're a bad person. I think you're misinformed, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person. That's just how our brain builds these mental models, right? The problem is if you try to get on a train in Mumbai the way you do here in Sydney, you die on the station. No, you'd never leave the platform.
Yeah.
Because the whole context is completely different.
And they're thinking you're stupid.
That's right. Well, maybe they're not even thinking. They're just on autopilot. This is just how you get on a train, isn't it?
That guy didn't get on the train again.
Yeah. Why are they standing back waiting over there when you just get on the train like this?
Yeah.
And context, the environment, the framing, all of those things play a huge role. You go back to the salad dressing thing, right? There is a million little factors at play. And, if my wife sends me to get salad dressing and I come back with the wrong one, she's like, how could you get that wrong? I'm like, well, but it's so easy to get it right. How couldn't I have got it wrong? There's so many options. And she's like, but there's only, for her, it's really clear and obvious. For me, it's incredibly complex.
Why'd you get the one with lots of sugar in it?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, totally. So, but objectively, is getting salad dressing either really simple or really complex? Well, objectively, it's neither. Right? It's very contextual.
It's just when you've got two humans involved, it can become quite complex.
And so where does that travel to business? Well, you sit down, and I'd love to do this experiment if there's any advisors who want to do this with me. One of the experiments we want to do is get advisors and their customers to sit down and have a conversation. Record the conversation, get it transcribed, and at some point in the future, share a bunch of phrases that were spoken in that meeting with the client, and just ask them to cross out any of the terms or phrases or any of the acronyms that they didn't understand. Just cross them out. And then present what's left back to the advisor and go, you had the conversation in your mind, they understood it, right? Felt like they understood it all. And you understood it all, so you assume they did. But here's actually what landed.
I don't have high hopes for that sometimes, I don't think.
No, but this is the important, this is critical, right? Because what lands for the client is the basis by which they say yes or no, the basis by which they trust you, the relationship, everything that goes forward from that moment.
Well, it's generally an emotive decision.
Absolutely, right? And
unless there's a certain subset where there was a really rational way that things were decided upon. But the majority
is, and
all they remember is the emotive thought that they made.
And this is a really that's a really important point for everyone to remember. We don't remember everything that happens. Our memories don't work like videotape, right? Or I don't know, videotape doesn't exist anymore, but anyway,
it's not like photographs.
It's not like a series of photographs or video at all. The way we remember things is by prioritizing specific moments. And the way we prioritize is based on whether something had an emotion attached to it. All right, so I'll give you an example. People often say, Daniel Kahneman, the great Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, he's studied this extensively. I highly recommend looking up his work in this space. If you go to Disneyland, the majority of people say it was magical. It was amazing. What an amazing day we had at Disneyland. Yeah? Cool. Agree. If you took a minute-by-minute play of their day, the majority of their day was standing in really long lines, paying way too much for terrible food, hearing people scream, trying to organise the kids, and, spending way more money than you hoped to.
There was that one moment.
Objectively, your day wasn't a great day. Right? You could easily look at all the information and go, that wasn't a very good day. But the emotions that you felt around your kids saw Donald Duck or all these different activities, these emotions, these peaks mean your brain, it's almost like a highlighter for your brain or memory, and you highlight that and you drag the whole day comes with that, and you go, Disneyland was amazing.
It was too complicated to say it was just that point in the day.
But it's even more than that. Your brain doesn't remember it in a videotape. It remembers moments, and any moment that has a really strong emotional peak, we way overemphasize.
So happy child in Disneyland and memory. Done.
Sees the princess. Oh my God. Yeah, this was amazing. Right? Weddings are the same. People love weddings. Most of it's sitting around eating dinner with your family. Right? You don't love Sundays at your mum's place as much as you do a wedding.
Hey, speak for yourself.
But, it's a different experience because there's different levels of emotion.
Yep.
And these emotions are what drive us, and the emotions are all that really matter.
It's so interesting. One of the things that was coming to mind when you were talking before is around the empathy piece is sort of like being conscious but not acting on it. What do you say around that space? So a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I understand what's going on there. I'm just not going to change how I'm behaving. Or
okay, cool.
Because that would be another thing you come up against. Because obviously there's the awareness piece. Cool. And then there's the people that are aware that aren't actually acting on that awareness. What's going on there?
That's a really good point. I think about empathy as a two-step process. You build it, then you get to use it.
Yeah.
Right? And so bad salespeople, and we've all experienced this, think that they try and use it before they built it, right? They come up to you and go, Adrian, I know you need this new jacket. Here's raising, it does all these things. Here's this thing you need. You definitely need this. And they just start telling you what you need. And everyone goes, you have no idea, right? Leave me alone. You're just annoying. That's a good example.
Well, but there's enough people that say, oh, yeah, to keep them going.
Well, what they do is they have a bunch of features, and this is the old way of sell, right? Build a bunch of features, then go and tell lots and lots of people, and some people will want those features. So you'll be right sometimes.
Yeah.
Not a particularly effective strategy.
It's not very 21st century.
Not very 21st century, no. Although it's still heavily used. Right? So empathy is this two-step process. Now, building empathy is building an understanding of what's going on for another person, what's happening. I'm going to be controversial. It is not walking in someone else's shoes per se. Because walking in someone else's shoes will be your experience in their shoes. That's not their experience in their shoes.
Yeah.
Right? If your little kid's doing maths homework, my daughter, she's doing maths homework. She's a bit young yet, but when she does, if I say to her, well, what do you mean it's hard? It's easy. I did maths homework when I was a kid, and it was easy, so it'll be easy for you. That's not empathy. I have walked in her shoes.
Yeah.
I could sit down and do her homework now.
Yeah.
Right? That's not empathy.
And even, I guess, actually that's something that you'd see that's probably one of the, I've seen in the workplace, and in that jump from, that non-acceptance that, well, if that's how I behave in that situation.
That's right.
Then why, you should sort your shit out and just do the same thing.
That's right. And it's a really cool point, right? So empathy is building this understanding of another person, what's driving them, what's going on there, and there's a lot to unpack in that. The second step is how you use it is up to you. I would say, controversially maybe, I'd say Bernie Madoff was probably really empathetic. He really understood what drove people. He understood their greed. He understood exactly how to motivate them, to give them unbelievable amounts of money that he stole and defrauded them on. How he chooses to use it is up to him, right? And this is a decision for all of us. If you're a hugely empathetic person, sociopaths are often incredibly empathetic. They know how it makes you tick, right? And they play on that constantly.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who'll talk about, particularly in relationships where, people will say things just because they know it's going to create a certain reaction. Well, that requires me to understand your experience and what's going on in your head, and then I'm going to use it against you. That's a much more difficult thing to change. But what we try and do in business is we try and change those behaviours and outcomes without giving people better understandings of what's actually going on with each other.
So you're taking people that don't have that toolkit.
That's right. That first toolkit. How do I actually build this understanding of what's going on?
So they might have the right, once they're taught, then they'll make the best use of it.
I can't fix people with bad intent, and that's a different thing, right?
Is that that sort of sits in the cultural?
It sits in cultural. Look, there's the old phrase, like a few percent, 1% of the population are like, psychopaths and things like that. And so if you're in a room of 100 people, there's one somewhere. I don't know who it is, but one of, there's lots of things. I'm not about how do you fix those people. I'm about how do you take the other 99 and help them to do the first part more effectively. Because I think most people in business, most advisors, most people in any industry have genuinely decent intent for each other. It's the skills in which to overcome these constraints our brain puts on our mental models. That's the bit we want to try and do first. Most people, they're not out to hurt and be vindictive on other people. Most of the problem happens when they don't understand that person's driver's perspective, what's going on with them, and therefore they prescribe something which totally misses the misses the point, not because they had bad intent.
Yeah. Would you? My mind's going to a space where you've got the observation of other people and how you react to their, activity. But what about that same sort of, so being empathetic on that, what about the same sort of breadth of thought when you're thinking about yourself?
Yeah. It's a really, self-reflection's tough, right?
Yeah.
The neuroscience is very clear on this. The world doesn't exist other than the way you construct it in your head.
Yeah.
And so often the way you see things isn't what's there, it's how your brain is constructing the story that's going on, right? And so, what's the story that's going on for someone else? The critical point is being clear that I think that's true only because of what's going on in my own head. And if I want to be able to change this story, I need to be able to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Like, I guess the scenario I'm thinking, like maybe a couple where there's been a situation where there's friction, there's an issue, and the person's been empathetic to the other partner. The other partner's now in a much better space.
Yep.
But they haven't actually sorted themselves out. So they've fixed that issue that's arisen, but they haven't actually
so
adjust.
It's a really interesting point. There's a big difference between when I go into emotions, I run workshops in this space and we talk about emotions. It's weird, right? A guy with a maths degree and an MBA who's worked in banking and finance coming and talking about emotions.
Yeah.
But they're really important. You've got to deal with them, right? We've got to be able to access this.
Is this like, I know how everything works. I just didn't figure this one out. I got to go figure it out.
A little, maybe.
I've got the maths model of the world. That goes there, everything.
I guess the question
These emotions just keep on screwing up my models.
Totally. Totally. Well, and the thing is there anything more important than other people, right? We all make the decisions. It's human. All problems are human problems. Your iPhone never has a problem. Your computer never has a problem. Like, it doesn't.
What's our problem with this?
It's your problem because it's not doing the things you want it to do, right? It's still a human problem. And so we need to realise this about humans. All things are human. All problems are human problems, and we need to understand what drives humans. What drives humans is emotion. I buy the car because of how it might make me feel, not because of what it is. Right?
How has this applied to your life? How have you? So you get this flag that comes up saying, "This is not rational, but I'm still going to do it."
Totally, absolutely.
And, but you've got this. Would you say you've got this heightened awareness maybe as this journey's going on, and you're like, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. I'm just like everybody else. I'm going to
go. The interesting thing with emotions, financially, having a child is a really, really dumb idea, right? From an advisor's perspective, you'd go, return on investment, horrible.
Right? It's a depreciating asset.
It's not a great thing to do, but we do it, right? You would, if you were going to advise a customer buying a car, you would go, I don't know, a Corolla maybe, or a Kia. Utility, low cost.
Yeah, used car.
Yeah, used car.
Yeah.
But we don't do that. We buy, I don't want that. What's interesting, and this is where humans are beautiful, right? This is the amazing part about us. Because if we didn't have that heightened awareness, there'd be no art. Why would someone pay millions and millions of dollars for some material with some colours on it? Right? That's just ridiculous. What we do, though, is humans project a story onto that. that canvas, the Mona Lisa, for example, that canvas isn't a canvas. It's all of the shared knowledge and memory we have about that, and all of these amazing stories that go with it. That's what you're buying, right? You're buying all of that. Most of that exists only in our heads. Mm-hmm. It's not real. Can't touch it. I can touch the painting, but that's useless. And this is
for example, I personally struggle with art sometimes in that. So what's it represent? What's it mean?
And other people go, what do you mean? What does it mean? Like, can't you see it? This is why we're amazing.
Yeah, it's red. Red, it's well constructed.
That's right. There's famous paintings.
Just a bit of left brain, right brain going on here.
Well, it's just different brains, right? We all have these different amazing brains. And it's this diversity that allows us to come up with brand new ideas. So I'll give you a simple exercise to think about the need for diverse brains. I've got a bit of a bugbear, right, because most diversity in Australia, particularly in business, is really focused on gender and race. And don't get me wrong, we do need to improve the gender balance, and we do need to get a much better. We need to get less old white men. It's the only thing I'm going to become in my old age, unfortunately. But we need to get less old white men and more amazing different people.
But you're about to say that the layer below that is what
we need, though, is different brains who think differently. That's what business needs. So imagine we've got three brains, right? And these brains produce an output, 0 to 9. Each one of them can produce any single number from 0 to 9. So we've got 10 possibilities, 1,000 possible answers can come out of these three brains. Really stable, because there's only 1,000 possible answers. Each one of them in themselves aren't particularly complicated. And therefore, if you wanted to create a team with stability and simplicity, this is a great team. Right? If you live in a really complicated world like we do now, volatile, uncertain, ever-changing technology, blah, 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 this is not going to cut it. So we take one of the brains out. We bring in a new brain. This brain thinks in letters. What happens now? Well, now instead of 10 by 10 by 10, it's 10 by 10 by 26. Okay, now we've more than doubled the number of possible outcomes. Gone from 1,000 to 2,600 in a second, right? It was easy.
Yeah.
Cool, let's take out another brain and let's bring in one that thinks in colours. What happens now? Well, options
the
explode.
whole rainbow, yeah.
Options start to explode, right? The number.
So what happens but when those new brains come in?
Absolutely. So when the new brains come in, two things happen. One, the number of opportunities for us to create new stuff explodes. Now, if you have three people who've all got colour brains, you almost get overwhelmed with too much opportunity. And this is why diversity is useful, right? Because the 0 to 9 guy helps constrain and create some stability. So this team is a much, much more effective team than the first team. The challenge is the mental models that these three brains were built from scratch, from birth, are almost certainly going to be vastly different. When they relate to each other, they will automatically, naturally, because we're designed this way, assume that they're the same. Right?
If between the different?
Well, of course, they'll go, at work, this is the way we act. We all wear suits and ties, and, the first brain might go, we wear suits and ties, we come in at 8, we leave at 5, when times get tough, we grit our teeth and we work longer hours, and that's how you do business, right? This is how business works. And in the old days, that was fine. That's how everyone got by, and if you didn't do it that way, maybe business wasn't for you. That was the old way of thinking.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that doesn't work anymore. We need this new group who look really different. And so suddenly one of the people are coming in wearing a suit and tie, the other's coming in on a skateboard wearing, shorts, and they're going, well, you mustn't be very professional because you're not dressing like I am. This is a good example of those clashing mental models, right?
Well, it's such a great space to talk about in respect of advisors and what's expected of them, what they want to do, what their clients want. A lot of the listeners out there and a lot of, I guess, the guys in the XY advisor community, I guess, are constantly battling against this because they're thinking the way you're thinking, but they're still within a constraint of, I guess, you've got the societal expectations, you've got what other advisors are doing, you've got what clients expect, what they don't expect, and
absolutely, and that's where it becomes difficult because. And this is my advice would be what you need to be able to do is understand where that person's coming from. If they demand that you turn up in a suit and tie, you could say, well, maybe that's because they're a certain type of person. Maybe ask yourself a question, well, what else might be true? Why else might they be thinking that? And explore that a little bit more.
Just give me an idea, like a little questionnaire before the meeting. What would you like me to wear?
Yeah, well, maybe now I would think they would probably go, well, you know what I want you to wear, right? Because I expect you to already know that. And this is where...
I see you do a bit of a closet question where it's like, oh, well, if you saw someone like this, what would you expect them to wear?
Well, here's an interesting... How do you know what to wear? How do you choose? Because you got to choose, right? You go into a meeting, you got to choose what to wear. How do you choose?
Yeah, well, I had a regression from ties because we were meant to wear ties all the time.
Yep.
And I don't find them very comfortable. And I took them off, and the clients still reacted the same. Cool. Okay. No ties. And then some people I've had. I actually had a chat with someone the other week. So we could. You happy for what would you think about shorts and thongs? And he's like, that'd be awesome. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. Then you got that whole weight of the expectations sitting there going, well, I do like the idea of that.
Yeah. So here's what's funny, right? When people say, oh, society has expectations, point to me where society is. And where are these expectations written out? They're in your head, right? You're exactly right. They're only in your head. It's the only place they exist.
All right, shorts and thongs with this.
It could be. Now, the question would be, does that work for your clients? Does that meet their needs? Do they still trust you? Is it, a lot of these things become really important.
Yeah, well, the question is, does it work for their subconscious?
That's right. And does it impact on the way that they're going to interact with you?
Exactly.
These are where things become important. And, you want to have, your advisors want to be peeling that back a little bit and thinking about these interactions. Advice in particular, I built a little story. It's like a kid's story for my daughter. She's only 7 months old, so she's a bit young, but the book's not ready yet, so it hasn't gone to publish. But the story's a really simple one. It's about a monkey and a rhino. They live around this big tree, right? And the monkey climbs to the very top of the tree, picks the young new leaves, which are the rhino's favourite, and takes it to the rhino. And the rhino, he fends off the lions when they come around trying to get to the monkey. They've got a good partnership going on, right? And so one day there's this huge storm. Storm rolls in, down comes the rain, and then it hails. Big wads of hail are slamming down, and after the storm has passed, the monkey's laying there, and he's battered and bruised, and he turns to the rhino and says, Rhino, are you okay after that storm? And the rhino's like, yeah, I'm fine. The monkey said, but the hail, it battered me, it's really hard. How come you're okay? And the rhino's like, well, I'm big and tough. I got thick skin. The monkey says, well, what have I got to do? And the rhino says, you've got to toughen up. You just got to get thick skin like me. Anyway, so the monkey thinks about it. He goes away and he finds some clay and mud. And he puts it on his arms and his legs and his chest and bakes himself in the sun. He's like, cool, I'm going to be sweet now, right? And he can't climb to the top of the tree anymore, which is a bit annoying for the rhino. But, his friend's going to be okay. Anyway, the next storm rolls in. Rain comes down, washes off the clay and the mud. Down comes the hail, and the same thing happens. The monkey's laying there again, battered and bruised. And he says to the rhino, what have I got to do? The rhino's like, it's easy. You just got to toughen up and get thick skin like me. So he's a bit annoyed and he dejected. He lays back against the tree. And as he does, this little squirrel pops his head out of a hole in the tree. And the monkey says to the squirrel, are you okay after that storm? And the squirrel says, yeah, I'm okay. I'm fine. Thank you. The monkey says, but do you have thick skin? It doesn't look like you've got thick skin. And the squirrel says, no, Mr. Monkey. We can't all have thick skin. It doesn't work that way. You've got to look at yourself and what capabilities you've got to survive. For me, I'm little, so I can hide in this hole in the tree, which is only really small. You've got to look around for ways that you might be able to survive. So the monkey thinks about it. He goes and he sees this ants living under a rock, but he can't live under the rock, right? And he sees the fish are fine in the little pond, but he can't hold his breath underwater. And he finds this hole, and there's a badger living in there, and the badger doesn't want to share, so he can't stay with him. But he thinks about it a bit more, and as the next storm rolls in, he walks over. He sits underneath the belly of the rhino and lets the hail hit the rhino, and he's safe. And the problem we have sometimes with advice is that we only see it from our own mental models. We only see it from our own frame of reference because we are trapped in our own frames of reference. We live with them all day. The whole world that we think is real is what we construct in our head, seen through our eyes and lived through our experience. So naturally, when we give advice, that's the place we give it from. Not because we're bad people, just because that's how we're designed.
Yeah.
And yet, as soon as we build these teams with this increased level of diversity, we immediately run into this problem, right? Most businesses in Australia have plenty of rhinos. We don't need more, right?
You got me thinking interestingly around like a lot of the way that problem or issues dealt with from a advice standpoint a lot of the time is by having other people look at the advice on the back end. But,
Are they
but
different?
the problem is, are they different? That's one question. And the other question is, like, what are they missing out on from, because you got me thinking about the front end and how do you bring more people into, like, maybe it would be a good idea to have two types of advisors in the same meeting for each client.
It could be, yeah. I mean, the challenge you've got is in a relatively short amount of time, your job is to understand what's driving the person you're meeting, right? That's what you're trying to do. What's going on with this person? And underlying that are two big pressures. One is this person wants financial advice and they want to know where to put their money and they've got a bunch of needs there. They don't want to talk about, which holidays they went on last year. They want to talk about this stuff. And so I feel this pressure that I need to meet that need. And you've got the pressure of I can't be here too long because financial advice is expensive and I need to go and see other clients, all these other things. So what frames your conversation too often is those two big elephants in the corner of the room, right? What is important to them is what does that person feel? What do they love? What do they dream about? What do they care about? And often I see we try and capture these through surveys and all this sort of stuff. And surveys and numbers are really ineffective at capturing the story that sits behind the person. I'll give you an analogy for this. So we're chatting before the interview. I'm a pretty fat cyclist now. I love cycling. I'm a bit of a mammal, right? Get a Lycra on. And one of my dreams was to cycle up this mountain, Mont Ventoux in France. It's very famous. Tour de France always go up there. It's 20 kilometres from bottom to the top. It's brutally steep, like 9-10% gradient. And it took me about 2 hours, right, to bottom to top, which is pretty slow.
It's still impressive. 9 degrees gradient.
It's hard work. But I didn't do it alone. I had like a heart rate monitor, I had a cadence monitor, I had a Garmin, tracker.
Had the electric motor?
No, electric motor. No, that's cheating. But I had all this, I have an iPhone and all this data capturing devices.
Yeah. And you're up there, you're going, this is fucked, and it's saying, oh, yep, you're at full peak of capacity.
That's right. Your heart's about to explode.
What would you do without that?
Well, what's interesting is I did all of that for the main reason, and all other middle-aged men in Lycra will know this. You've got to get the data so you can put it on Strava, the website.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So you can compete, because if it's not there, it never happened.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now, what's interesting is if I gave you all of that data and you looked through it, you would find nothing remarkable. Right? I wasn't particularly, if you mapped all of my data versus the hundreds of thousands of other people who've cycled up that mountain, I'd be nothing extraordinary. I'd be, in the middle of the bell curve, pretty dull. And you would overlook it as if it was nothing particularly important. But for me, that was a really proud moment in my cycling, career, in inverted commas. It was really important. I was very proud that I was able to achieve something that I dreamed of achieving for a really long period of time. And nowhere in that data does that sense of pride sit. But in my memory...
If anything, it detracts from it because you're like, I'm only at this level on the Strava rankings.
I came 30,000 out of 250,000.
Real special.
Big deal. But this is the point, right? So the data doesn't not only does it not capture the story, but the story and its importance is all that matters to me. The data is actually irrelevant. Yet we work with clients in a whole bunch of different industries and sectors where we go, let's run big surveys. If I gave you a spreadsheet and I said, okay, fill out this spreadsheet to describe yourself, you wouldn't be able to do it. The numbers wouldn't ever...
How long's the spreadsheet?
But the numbers wouldn't tell me about you, right? Yes, no answers, 1 to 10 answers, can't tell me about you. none of us would describe ourselves by numbers on a spreadsheet.
Wouldn't give enough depth, you might say.
It wouldn't tell our story, right? And the whole point is that the story is what actually what we care about. It's what drives us. It's what really matters to us, right? And often when we work on big spreadsheets and data and mine things, we find the averages. Who wants to be average? No one. No one's desperately, I hope I could just be sort of
just above average.
Everyone wants to be above average, right? And so the things that drive us are these senses of fairness and justice and love and passion, hope, fear. These things don't live on spreadsheets very well. They only exist in our heads, and they've got their hands on the steering wheel making most of the decisions, right? They drive the boat here. So we've got to really, I think, work out ways to tap into and understand what's going on in our clients' minds. What's the story that's driving them? Once you understand that, you're in a much better position to be able to work with them, understand what's going to be best for them in the future, plan that future with them. Great advisors will probably do this naturally, won't even think that they're doing it. Other people will do it with some people and they'll struggle with others. I just didn't connect with that person. All of these things are probably cases where you're trying to understand those things that are going on in other people's heads. Your natural default will be, we'll do things like, you would probably think the same way I would think, right? You'd want to make millions of dollars like I want to make millions of dollars. Or I've seen someone who is like you, looks like you, seems similar. They wanted ABC. What am I going to think you're going to want? ABC, right?
Yeah.
This is the natural assumptions we'll always make.
Well, a lot of people say like the natural gravitation of advisors is just for people that are similar to them. Like that's how. And
you'll probably be best placed for them because they'll trust you, and if you think about those mental models in your head, we'll synchronize those really quickly and easily.
There's less resistance to overcome.
That's right. The challenge is, going back to the diversity model, what's going to get us the most interesting outcomes in the future will be people who don't think like us. When I can collaborate with someone who thinks differently to me, then we've got a chance. Only if we can both understand each other's drivers and motivations, then we're in an awesome place, right? Because you hear this. I met a guy this morning who told me he went into an IT business. He'd never done IT. And he'd gone into this IT business. They'd hired him in. He just needed the work. He said, sure, I'll come and do it. And after about 12 months of working there, they said, okay, a couple of things. One, you're not very good at IT. He said, yeah, I know. They said, but you came up with ideas that we never thought of. You opened doors that we could never get to. You designed things that we never could have dreamt of. Because he saw the world through a different frame. And in that space, he created amazing outcomes for them. So when we're hiring people, are we hiring people based on what we think we need and looking for a certain set of attributes, or are we hiring people who are really different but can share these certain beliefs and understandings?
Who's going to complement?
Absolutely. Who's going to be the people who are going to pick up or see the world in a different shade of green to me, and that's going to allow us to see things that we either one of us on our own would never have been able to do.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. It's sort of, I've always looked at advice from a whole brain aspect, that advice practice needs to cover the full spectrum of, I guess, the type of brain and type of thinking to execute on, and style of behaviour to execute on what needs to be done in advice practice. But I suppose the only thing that doesn't reflect on is that if you've got that and you've still got a practice, like a head of the practice or a principal that's still making the shots over the top of everything, you're not getting the diversity at that level. So that's still casting this, I guess this, maybe not, shadow's not the right word, but
it might be the right word. Look, what you're describing there is the sort of leadership style that sits over this. And, I'm conscious that the majority of people who will listen to this will go, well, I'm not a leader. But I wish my leader would do these things and then he'd be a better leader or she would be a better leader. I'd challenge that everyone in their own right is a leader in some way, because you're always going to be influencing and working with other people. Now,
Whether it's from the top or the bottom.
top or the bottom, whether it's with your family and friend, there's always these situations where we've got to step up and be a leader in a certain situation. And we're really good at saying, well, if I was the leader, I would do these things, often without understanding what those pressures are and what's going on. So the thing I work on with leaders, and there's a couple of different exercises we do, but the way I sort of think about it is think of a sort of XY axis. So on the vertical axis, we've got questions at the top and answers at the bottom. And on the horizontal axis, we've got irrelevant on the left and relevant on the right. So you can either have relevant or irrelevant questions or answers. And so what we know is that people who ask lots of irrelevant questions are like annoying little kids, right? 4-year-olds. Why? And no one wants to be that person, right? So we sort of think that's a bad space. Questions and irrelevant questions are bad. What we actually do is for leaders in particular, and this is honed into us from kids. Right? When we're a little kid, teachers are smart and they know all the answers. You go to school, the kids who know all the answers are smart, right? Smartest kids. You go to uni, the same thing. Lecturer knows all the answers. TAFE, when you go to work, who's got all the answers? The boss, right? Person in the corner office, they've got all the answers. So we have this default mode that says the place to be on this graph is the bottom right. Have all the relevant answers. That's where the experts sit. And as an advisor, people often say, well, you're the expert. You know all the answers. Cool. Challenge with that is whether your answers are relevant or irrelevant is not up to you. It's up to the person hearing them, right? So,
in this case, the client. Yeah.
In the case of the client. Or maybe it's your employees if you're the lead, right? So if you fall into that category of you're giving lots of irrelevant answers, these are just seen as arrogant opinions. This bucket down here, the bottom left side, where we have lots of irrelevant answers, is not a place you want to be. And we've all been in that situation, right, where someone's just telling you, like, this is not what I wanted to hear. This is not the right. You're missing the point here. The problem with saying I'm going to start out trying to be an expert, trying to have all the relevant answers, is you don't control whether you flip over to being just full of arrogant opinions. That's not up to you. Relevance and irrelevance is up to the eyes of the person who's receiving it. So the thing I really coach and we do in workshops and through talks is how do we help people step up to relevant, curious questions. So curious leadership is sitting in this top right-hand corner. I'm starting with questions. Questions are my focus, and I'm trying to make sure that they're relevant questions. Because if you start in that place, you have a much, much better chance of keeping in the relevant space, right? Because you can clarify, oh, that was interesting, tell me more about that, and you can search. And if you need to give the answers, you're far better placed to stay relevant, right? It's much easier to stay on that side when you're asking lots of questions first. So I would say as a leader, if you're casting this shadow and you want to change that, or you think it's influencing the way you're doing things, I would be inclined to say, how do we tap into you as being a curious leader? So when rather than being the person with all the answers who sets the tone and this is how we're doing things, flip that and be the person that when someone walks into your office, you go, how you doing? Well, how can I help you today? What's going on? Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Well, what do you think we should do in that space? Dig into it, right? Just stay in the curious space. Some of the best leaders I've ever worked with, Peter Harmer at IAG is probably one of the best leaders I've worked with. I'd walk into his office and he'd go, hi, Daniel, how are you today? What can I help you with? That would be his opening question every single time.
What do you want?
What do you want to get out of this? Okay, well, what do you think about that? Oh, that sounds really interesting. What else is going on in that space? Or what? Such and such did this. Oh, what did they think about it? And he was constantly pushing the responsibility for answers back to me because he wanted to understand and stay relevant. Now, if there came a point where he had to make a decision, he was much better placed to do it. So as a leader, giving yourself that space, taking the responsibility off of I need to have all the answers to that's why I hire you guys, right? You guys are going to have the answers. From an advisor's perspective, it's the answers need to come from the client. Right? So your job is to be really, really curious so that you make sure that when you do have to provide the advice, it's got to be off the chart relevant, right? Any advisor who's given a piece of advice and the client's gone, Like, what? What's that? Almost certainly you fall into the trap of, well, I know what's best. Here's the right answer, but I didn't actually understand what's going on with that person, and therefore I've totally missed that relevance part.
Missed the mark.
So that's a really key point as well for leaders. How do the leaders create an environment where the expertise sits with their people and the tone is set by their people, and they lead through curious leadership?
So interesting. I hope everyone's it's intriguing listening to, I guess, these concepts talked about. So
it's hard to draw diagrams in the air too, I think.
Yeah, it is. Maybe we'll get a sketchboard next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always do diagrams.
Well, Daniel, it's been awesome to unpack these things and talk through them, and I hope everyone's been getting some insights out of it. And there's some great parallels we've had with advice and how it's relevant to the client relationship, and I think just people's lives in general. Yeah. What if people want to find out more about what you do, and I guess, or if they want to get involved in this space, or
so there's a couple of ways. Empathic Consulting is my business name, and the focus of Empathic Consulting is how do we create leaders who are curious, businesses who connect with people and understand people more. And so empathy is sort of the underlying thing we're really trying to build. How do we build empathy as a capability for business? The ways we do that, so I work with quite a few organisations on how do we structure the way they engage in the community and build a strategy around that so that it actually adds value to their business. I think too many businesses just do things because they think they should, or trying to be nice, and actually miss a lot of opportunities there. Second thing I do is I run workshops for groups, usually small groups, 8 to 10, sometimes a little bit larger. And these workshops are around taking some of the ideas, some of those concepts, and really starting to embed them in practice. We do some pretty cool, innovative stuff where we take groups to charities and different environments. The objective is not just to give back to the community, there's a part of it that's there, but the real objective is how do I take you into a zone or a space or to meet people where your mental models don't work anymore. Right? Because that's what we're battling against. We're battling against these frames of reference. So often we go into a boardroom, we run a workshop, no one cares, like everyone walks out going, oh, it's boring, because it's really hard to challenge your mental models when you're stuck in an environment that reinforces. So we run these workshops. They're really effective. We did some work with Mac Bank in this space, and it really blew them away. The last way we do this that I work is by speaking, keynote speaking, presentations, professional speaker. So come to conferences, leadership events, and just start to go through some of these exercises, much like we've done today, but really diving into how do we do this live amongst the audience,
interactive audience,
absolutely.
Definitely.
Getting Alan and Bob to have their stories and dobbing each other in, etc. The number one focus there again is how do we make things practical, easy, and relevant, so you can take them away and use them.
There'd be a lot of stuff you could do in the interactive space.
It's
what
pretty fun, and I use some, I guess you call them illusions in some way, to highlight the way your brain works. But the number one thing for me is how do we take this amazing world of neuroscience, psychology, behavioral economics, and create it in simple enough frameworks that businesses can pick it up and use it straight away. It's almost unreachable at some times. It sounds too complicated. It sounds fluffy. Well, that doesn't work, right? We need to make it really simple and robust. My background in strategy means that I try and make these things really simple, fit on a page, simple diagrams you can write down to remember, but they're tangible and usable, and gives you the opportunity straight away.
Takeaway is powerful.
Absolutely. You see the guys in the audience that write it down on a notebook, and that little sketch on the notebook becomes instantly usable on the cab ride home. That's where we want to get to. So, I do professional speaking is a really fun part of what I do, and you can get in touch with me through my website, or LinkedIn's always a good one. I put a lot of content up there as well.
Nice one.
Cool.
Daniel, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for
so
coming
much.
on.
Thanks, Adrian.